Welcome again. It's part two on this Sunday from our live feed from the May 23rd concert. I'm Ryan. I'd like to welcome everybody back. Thank you very much to our sponsors. As you guys know, we can't do this without you. Specifically, Vic and Carolyn Deirmendjian, Don and Betsy Robertson, Ellis Patterson. We thank you for your support to make this concert possible. Nothing happens these days without John Lockhart. So obviously, John, all our gratitude goes to you. Westminster Presbyterian, thank you for letting us host our concert with you. It was an amazing event. We hope to work with you guys again soon. It's our hopes in the fall we're going to resume public concerts in the Conejo Valley, of which we'd like to see everybody there. And at this moment, I'd like to introduce our esteemed new artistic director and conductor for this concert, Michael Stanley. So without any further ado, welcome and enjoy the show.
Thank you, Ryan, for that introduction. I appreciate it. It's a real pleasure to be here. Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Stanley, and I'm honored to be the new artistic director and conductor of the Westlake Village Symphony. I'll be your MC for this afternoon's online concert broadcast. To those of you who watched last week's broadcast, welcome back. We're glad you're here for part two. And for those of you joining us for the first time, well, I will just tell you a little bit about myself, and then we'll jump right into the music. While I am new to this position with Westlake Village Symphony, I'm not new to the Conejo Valley area. I actually grew up in Thousand Oaks. I graduated from Thousand Oaks High, and I began conducting various groups in the Conejo Valley right out of high school. I worked with the Young Artists Ensemble Teen Summer Musical, the Conejo Players Theater, and my own wind ensemble. In fact, I've known some of the players in this orchestra since that very time, so I'm really delighted to be back in the area and working with this wonderful group of musicians. As Ryan mentioned, the concert you're about to see was performed live at Westminster Presbyterian Church on the afternoon of Sunday, May 23rd. And we had a very enthusiastic audience who were really happy to be there at a live concert. And we were very happy to be putting on a live concert. And we had wonderful weather that afternoon, and it turned into a splendid afternoon of music making. So we're really glad that you can join us here so that more people in the community can share in this wonderful concert. Last week in our first broadcast, we covered the first half of the concert, which included the St. Paul Suite by Gustav Holst and Novelette No. 3 by Samuel Coleridge Taylor. Then we gave you just a teaser, the very beginning of the next piece in the concert, which is Concerto for Two Violins and Cello by Antonio Vivaldi. And by the way, if you missed last week's concert broadcast, it can be found on the orchestra's website at westlakevillagesymphony.com or on our YouTube channel by searching Westlake Village Symphony. Last week, you met our two violin soloists, Dianne Rammon and Carrie Celaya, and I'd like to bring them back into the program now. Dianne and Carrie, welcome back.
Hi.
Hi, how are you this week?
Great. Can't hear Dianne.
We can't hear Dianne. Maybe she can work on that. In addition to these two wonderful soloists, we also have our cello soloist with us this week, our principal cello, Mr. John Fair. So I'd like to bring John in at this time. Hi, John.
Hello.
How are you?
Good afternoon. Good.
Good afternoon. It's nice to have you with us here. So we have all the soloists this week as we listen to the concerto. So before we begin the performance, I thought it would be good to talk just for a moment about how Vivaldi constructs this music for our listeners so they can understand more of what they're hearing. In this concerto, Vivaldi uses a couple of common musical devices, imitation and patterns. In the first movement, we're going to focus on the imitation. In the introduction to this movement, you will hear just the two violin soloists, Dianne and Carrie, start the movement by themselves, and Vivaldi uses this technique of imitation. Imitation in music is exactly what it sounds like. You'll hear one player play something, and then the other one will repeat it back or imitate it. Then at the end of their duet, you'll hear John enter with a cello solo, accompanied by what's known as the continuo part. In a Baroque concerto, the continuo part basically provides the harmony and the bass line to accompany the soloists. So this group consists of the rest of the cellos and basses on the bass line, and the harpsichord filling out the chords behind the solo. Then after the three soloists finish, you'll hear a short, slow section that consists of some chords separated by taking the bows off the string. And this is a technique known as spiccato in string playing. This serves as a short transition to the final section of the first movement, which is a fugue. Now, a fugue is a more formal type of imitation in which the voices enter one at a time, and they each imitate the musical figure that's introduced by the first one. So in this case, these voices follow a very common pattern in fugue, which is to enter from lowest to highest. So first you will hear the cello bass start the fugue with a musical motif, which is known as the subject of the fugue. And I've asked John if he would be so kind as to just demonstrate that subject, so when you hear it, you'll know what it is. Thanks, John. And then after that introduction, the next higher instrument in the orchestra, which is the viola, will enter, and they will play what's called the answer, which will be an imitation of the initial subject that you just heard. Then the second violins come in next, playing the subject, and the first violins the answer. And then once all the voices are in, the fugue develops all these musical ideas. So without further ado, let's listen to the first movement of Vivaldi's Concerto for Two Violins and Cello. All right. Now that we've heard that first movement all the way through, I'd like to talk with the soloists just briefly about their experience of playing it. So the three soloists form what is known as the concertino, or the solo group, and the rest of the orchestra is referred to as the ripieno, or concerto grosso, which means the larger group of everyone who's not a soloist. Now, because there are three soloists instead of one, the three soloists had to agree on how to interpret this music. So I was wondering if any of the soloists would like to comment on how you work together to play the music and interpret it in a unified style.
I can say,
Okay.
well, we first met together, as just us with Mike, and talked about how we wanted to interpret it. And we kind of put our 2 cents worth in, which was great. And then we kind of came to a consensus of what to do, how we were going to play it. And then we we worked with the rest of the ensemble and taught them how we were going to bow and phrase and those sort of things.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, was about how you then communicate that to the orchestra. Does anyone else want to chime in on that?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. I was very happy that Michael had very definite ideas about how he would like the music to be interpreted. I've listened to several recordings, and there are certainly a varied number of ways to play this music. But Michael had very definite ideas about to play, which I think all worked, and I appreciate that. And then, of course, we had to communicate that to the members of our sections as well.
Yeah. John, did you have anything on that?
Well, I was just going to say, when I first played some Baroque music back in the last millennium, I played it pretty much like any other music. That was before I had any idea of what Baroque style might be. And then as I went on to higher training, I got trained in another style of how to play Baroque, which has now been superseded with further scholarship. The problem is, of course, there are no recordings from the 17th century or the 18th century to see how it really sounded. So all of this is sort of intuited from little notes in books and descriptions of style that were contemporaneous with the creation of the music. So what we learned with Mike was probably some of the latest ideas on how to play Baroque music, and it really made an incredible difference. And it was a challenge to immediately execute that different style, but especially I think our violinist did a great job of that.
Yeah, I think you all did a really great job of adapting to that. And then, like you were saying, then communicating that all to the sections and demonstrating for them. I know we did a number of demonstrations for them to kind of not only see and hear, because as we talked about last week, the bows were different back then. They were shorter and the notes tended to be played more off the string. So it was in a style that many of the players weren't very familiar with. So I appreciated how quickly you guys assimilated that. And then you were able to demonstrate it for the orchestra. And over the rehearsal process, we were really able to change the playing. So my goal with that piece was to have the orchestra sound like a different orchestra for that piece than it did for all the other pieces. And I think we achieved that. So I think you guys did a great job on that. I'd like to now go on to the second movement, which is the traditional slow movement. If you think of a 3-movement concerto, fast, slow, fast, it's the slow movement. And in this particular work, Vivaldi decided to write the entire second movement as a solo for the first violin soloist. Now, as we mentioned last week, Vivaldi was himself a virtuoso violinist. And so it's highly probable that he wrote this solo to feature himself. And according to what I've read, Vivaldi was reputed to be a rather vain man. So it may not be much of a surprise that he would write this gorgeous melody for himself to play. But in our performance, that solo was played by our concertmaster, Miss Dianne Rammon, who is absolutely not vain at all, but a very sweet and humble person who played it beautifully. Dianne, could you just tell us what you thought about playing that solo, how you shaped it, what kind of musical ideas you brought to it?
I tried to abide by your suggestions to not make it too romantic, even though it's a little difficult sometimes to play a long tone completely straight without vibrato. But I tried my best to do that because I know that that was your idea. And I appreciated that. I find the melody to just be not too long, not too short, just right. It's just a beautiful, beautiful melody for a solo violin.
Yeah, and I think that probably owes a lot to the fact that Vivaldi would have played it himself, so he was able to write in a way that was really natural for the instrument.
Yes.
That's definitely a good point. And I know we worked on bringing some dynamic shapes to not just your melody, but my job then was when I heard your dynamic ideas, then got the rest of the orchestra to sort of match that. So when you get soft, they get soft, and when you build up, they build up. And I think it made a nice combination.
So the idea that it was quite intimate in certain sections. Quite
Yeah,
soft.
very much so. I'd also like to now bring in our principal second violin, Jennifer Deirmendjian, and talk to her about the way she viewed it coming from the accompaniment. So again, the main part of the orchestra is called the ripieno, and the three soloists are the concertino. Jennifer, how are you today?
I'm well, thank you. How are you, Mike?
I'm great. Thank you for being on the show with us. I remember we spent some time talking about how to accompany Dianne's solo, and I wonder if you could just comment on the experience of you leading the second violins through how to accompany her and match the style, but also be under her and support her.
Yes. Well, as the ripieno player, as the leader of the second violin ripieno player, I tried to match her sound and her bowings, especially. Try to follow the bowings that are given to us in the second violin section, and just to provide that support of being the ripieno players, the foundation for the soloists.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that through most of her solo, the cellos and basses don't play. So the second violins and the violas are providing the harmony and the bass line, which is a very thin texture. And that was another way that allowed Dianne's solo to come through so nicely. I also wanted to ask Carrie, because Carrie, you and John both in this movement became part of the ripieno in the sense that your music was the same as Jennifer's music. And so I wondered if you could just talk about the mindset of switching roles from leading as a soloist to leading, you and Jennifer leading the section as part of the backing ensemble. How did that change for you?
Well, I obviously have to come down in volume for sure, so that the soloist can stand out. I'm still very aware of her, even her body movements with the violin. So I'm feeling just to stay right with her. And then the second violin section can see me do it. And so we kind of all just have to watch each other and really be aware of staying together and being under her.
Yes, absolutely. I think you brought up a really good point, which is, as Dianne mentioned, it's kind of a very intimate, soft movement. And I think one of the great things about it is with them watching you, it became sort of like chamber music. And I was trying to stay out of the way. And, you know, in string playing, everything's visual, everything's external. So the players can really watch each other and imitate everything, including, like you said, the body movements, the length of the bow and all that stuff. So I thought that you guys in the orchestra did a nice job of making that almost chamber music-like and really accompanying Dianne. So that was really great.
And besides, can I
go
say
ahead.
one more thing? Besides the visual, you also have to listen, because sometimes her volume will get bigger in the solo. And so we kind of have to raise with her, and then we have to dive back down again with her and listen. Yeah,
Absolutely. And in the beginning, I think it took a little bit for the whole section to kind of get that idea, because if they play loud and she gets soft, they may not notice, oh, she got softer. But once they were aware of that and they could stay under her, it was a really magical effect. I think we had some really great moments in that. Thank you. So let's go ahead and listen to Dianne's beautiful solo on the second movement. And as a listener, try to be aware of the contrast between the ripieno and the supporting ensemble and the soloists. Nice job, Diane, and nice job, orchestra, of accompanying her. That was wonderful. So we're going to go on to the third and final movement. And in this movement, I'm going to focus on musical patterns, which is another technique that Vivaldi uses in this concerto. You know, composed music is rarely random. Rather, the composer orders the notes and rhythms in such a way as to create some kind of an internal structure that binds the music together. And it has an effect on the listener, whether they're conscious of it happening or not. And musical patterns is one of the ways that the composer can create this inner structure. So I've asked John Fair, our principal cello, to demonstrate a little bit of the concept of musical patterns and how Vivaldi uses them in the last movement of this concerto.
They're in the solo cello part. This is only me playing against the rest of the orchestra, as it were. There's a section where basically the same phrase gets repeated 4 times over, but at different pitch levels. So it's not all the same. It just takes you on a journey. So the first measure is, and I misspoke. That's the whole thing. But to go back to just take it apart a little bit, it starts and then repeats. A little bit different, then exactly the same. Then again. So this is an unusual case where actually the idea is repeated 4 times. Usually 3 is the maximum. They don't want to wear you out with the same thing. But here Vivaldi really took a chance and made it 4 times. So that was, if someone was thinking about it or just accustomed to the style, that would be a surprise. And a lot of the appeal of music is sometimes you're surprised by what happens. It's not entirely predictable at all. So that's what he did. And then finally it's capped off by this, which it kind of caps it off nicely, and then we go on to the next section.
All right. Thank you so much, John. Yeah, and when it does get capped off there, the full orchestra comes back in with you to complete the phrase. So it kind of highlights the climax of that phrase.
Yes.
So so you're going to hear the opening of this movement is very similar to the opening of the first movement. You're going to start with the first 2 violins, soloists, and you're going to hear them playing a musical idea that they imitate, only this time, instead of imitating it exactly, each time the next person plays, they're going to raise the top note of the phrase by 1, so you'll hear it going up the scale. Da, 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 da. But it's done overlaid between the 2 different violin parts, so he creates a really wonderful effect. And then after they've introduced that, the cello will come in as a supporting voice before it launches into the part that John just demonstrated, where you'll hear this 1 measure pattern repeated 4 times, and each time it does, he goes down a step in the scale. So he's starting 1 note lower in the scale each time, and then when he gets to the end, he runs up the scale into the climactic moment. So let's go ahead and hear this last movement of the Vivaldi Concerto.
Bravo, everybody.
You too, Diane.
It was fun, wasn't it?
Yeah, wonderful
Yes, it
job,
was.
everybody. Wonderful job. You guys did such a fabulous job with that movement. I really am impressed with how well you played it. So beautiful. So thank you so much for your musicianship. I thought before we go to the next piece, I'd switch over to some practical matters for just a moment. You know, the Westlake Village Symphony is what is known as a community orchestra, which means it's made up of amateurs to professionals and everything in between. And when you have amateur players sitting next to more experienced players, how do you make sure that everyone learns their part? So I thought I would ask Jennifer and John, because I know that you two did have some extra rehearsals. In orchestra, we call these sectionals or section rehearsals, in which the section leader will meet with just their section and kind of go over the music, demonstrate for them, give them bowings, fingerings, and basically try to help them learn the music up to the level of the more advanced players. So I wondered if one or both of you could just kind of explain a little bit more about sectionals and why they're valuable to the orchestra.
Sure. So when we have a sectional, which, as you said, is a rehearsal with only one section, I pass along the proper bowings, proper counting, and phrasing which is applicable. From time to time, I must correct any wrong notes or anything out of tune, which is rare but sometimes necessary. So, and that's what we do.
John?
I would like to add that it's been a great pleasure. In fact, that's one of the most satisfying and fun things to do is get all the cellos under one roof with nobody else listening. And we hash through all the parts and we all learn. I learn a lot of things and the section learns that it's been proven especially over the course of several years that we've been doing this on a semi-regular basis, that it has in fact improved the playing of the section so that it can be really take its place as one of the foundational pieces of the orchestra. And I take ideas freely from other people and say, you know what, that's better than my idea. Let's go with that. So that happens quite a lot. So that also pleases me quite a bit.
Wonderful. Yeah, you both touched on some important issues. And I know also, John, that you would bring to your section some of the ideas that we had gone over in rehearsal that maybe not everyone had gotten in their music. And you were able to review those with them and say, okay, in this part, you know, the conductor wants to do it like this, so let's make sure we're all together.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And things like that. So you really are able to help with not just the fundamentals of playing the music, but also the interpretive ideas as well. So those are something that is really valuable for the orchestra. I think now I'd like to go on to our next piece in our program, which is a beautiful little gem of a piece. It's called Andante Festivo, and it was composed by the Finnish composer John Sibelius. Now, Sibelius is well known for another orchestral work called Finlandia. And he was part of the Finnish nationalist movement, which took place in the late 19th and early 20th centuries when the Finns were trying to get their independence from Russia. So he wrote this piece, and like the middle section of Finlandia, it's in the form of a chorale, which sounds at times as though it could even be a national anthem of sorts. It has a very simple, singable melody, and you could almost imagine it being sung by a choir instead of played by strings. And in fact, as we worked on this piece with the strings, we talked a lot about the idea of using the bow as a singer would use their air, and to allow the music to sing through the instruments, so it didn't sound like strings, but it sounded like a choir with the tone of string instruments. So let's listen and enjoy this beautiful Andante Festivo by John Sibelius. Bravo, everyone. That was a beautiful performance of that piece. Now we're going to go on to the final piece in our concert, which is the Romanian folk dances by Bela Bartok, a Hungarian composer. Bartók, like Sibelius, was also a musical nationalist in the sense that he really felt that the true music of a people was in its folk music. So he became very interested in the folk music of Eastern Europe, and he felt it was his duty to collect and preserve as much of this music as possible before it died out and went away forever. So every summer, Bartók would hike around the countryside, and the more remote, the better in his idea. And he was collecting what he called the peasant music, places like Slovakia, Transylvania, and Romania. He brought with him a primitive recorder, and he would live amongst the people and record their native folk songs, and he would later take them home and transcribe them and catalog them and study them. So this is the source of all the melodies in Romanian folk dances. In this piece, we were also able to bring in a few of our woodwind, brass, and percussion players to augment the strings. So at this time, I'd like to bring in one of our wind players, Debbie McMurray, who's coming to us live from Hawaii. So talk about dedication. Aloha. Aloha, Debbie. Welcome. How are you doing?
Doing great. Doing great.
Wonderful. So I wonder if, as the representative of the winds, if you could just tell us a little bit about the experience of playing in this concert, the winds and joining with the strings, and if you had any observations about that experience.
Well, one of the things was that we normally are behind the violins in the orchestra, but we were also behind plexiglass and a little farther away because of COVID. So it became a challenge to not only kind of play with the group and be in sync because of time and distance. It also was a challenge, especially for me, to see the conductor. So I found it to be a little more challenging than normal, just because of the time and distance, and the plexiglass blocked our sound. On piccolo, not so much, because piccolo kind of carries. But when I was playing flute, I felt like I was playing extremely loud, and the strings and you as a conductor were saying, "Are you guys playing back there?" So I found it extremely definitely was challenging, and especially in the Bartók movement, and we'll talk about the third movement a little later, but when there's really no rhythm, because on the folk dances, they're kind of more feeling it than they are with percussion, it was really a challenge to kind of follow the vibe and the beat, because there really wasn't one, and you were it, but you didn't want to get behind the chord changes. So it was really a challenge, but I found it to be kind of refreshing, because we hadn't played live music in over a year. So it was really a lot of fun to be able to get back into the swing of things and realize how music is really healing. And I felt like I was kind of healing coming out of COVID. So it was really fun.
Oh, that's a great bunch of points that you bring up there. Yes, I remember you showed me a photograph of what I looked like from where you were sitting, and I thought, my goodness, I wonder how they're even able to follow, because between the plexiglass and the distance, it was definitely more challenging than just playing in a normal orchestra in non-COVID times.
Right.
So I appreciate you mentioning that. In the orchestra in general, the winds are often soloists, and that's the case with the first few movements of this Bartók. The winds were frequently either soloists or they were doubling with the melody with the first violins. And on the first movement, this happens to be the case with the clarinets. They're playing the melody in conjunction with the first violins. And unfortunately, we were not able to get any of our clarinetists here to the show today, but we do want to hear them perform. So I'm going to introduce the first movement. Is called Jok Ku Bata, which translates as stick dance. It's a solo dance for a young male dancer, and Bartók first heard the melody played by two solo gypsy violins. In this movement, he puts the melody into the clarinets and the first violin. So let's hear how that sounds, the first movement of the Bartók, the stick dance. Yeah, nice job on that. Now, the second movement, Brawl, is a sash or a waistband dance. And this dance would have been performed by young women with their arms around each other's waists where they would have a sash tied. And like the first movement, it features the clarinet, first alone as a solo, and then with the first violins. I wanted to ask Dianne for a moment about the experience, having done the rest of the concert strings only, how it was different for you and your section to play with the winds versus playing alone. What kinds of considerations do you have to make with the violin section, considering you're in the front and the winds are in the back, in order to play together with them?
Well, I would say we weren't under, as Debbie mentioned, we weren't under ideal conditions, because it was difficult to hear the woodwinds and the brass players so far behind us. But I think you did a very good job of keeping everybody together, and it's just more listening. When you're playing with other instruments besides your section, you are more tuned into. You're playing with other people, and especially since we're playing the same melody together.
Yeah, absolutely. The listening and the watching was what we had to do to get that to come together, but I think it came together really nicely. So let's go ahead and listen to the second movement of the Bartok. Yeah, that worked very well. You guys got together really nicely on that. Now, the third movement is the piccolo solo that Debbie played, that she was referencing earlier. It's called Pelok, which translates as stamping dance or standing still, meaning that the dancers would dance in one spot and never move from that spot. Now, in this movement, you're going to hear some different tonality. You'll hear a Middle Eastern influences in the scale that it uses. And Debbie, I just wondered if you could talk for a moment about that solo, what it was like to play it, and what kinds of feelings it conjured up for you.
Well, one of the things I noticed, oops, am I on? I guess I'm on. One of the things I noticed, first of all, and thanks to you, Mike, I didn't realize it was originally written for piano. So when I looked at the piano version and I looked at the orchestral version on the solo, there was a lot of missing pieces in the orchestral. So it gave me a chance to kind of and see how to make it more kind of folky, and how he originally had written it for piano. Also, I did some research on the instruments that they used back then, which were basically shepherd's flutes, not necessarily piccolo, and it kind of had a high pitch, but it only had like a range of 6 or 7 notes, which is why the solo itself is only in a major 6, which is basically the first 6 notes of the scale. That's it. And with that, you have certain influences. The dance, when they're kind of standing still, but they're stomping at certain areas, and it's not like a 1, 2, 3, 4. It's various parts of the measure, and you really can't tell what tempo it's in as far as a time signature, because it's all this kind of folky kind of dance type of style. So I found it to be very fascinating to kind of try to make it sound, even though I'm using a modern instrument, make it sound like it was something back from the early 1900s. And I felt very confident that I had done that, because as I was leaving the concert, one of the the violas actually jumped out of his car, came over and said, "Man, you sounded really folky on that piccolo solo." So I was like, "Yay, I survived." So it made me feel good.
Yeah, nice job on that. It's really, I think, bringing in that element of what it would have sounded like had the peasants been playing it or the native people playing it, and they weren't playing on a modern instrument and they weren't trained musicians. I think that's a really good point because it brings out more of the character of the music. So I really appreciate that you did all that work to kind of bring out the folksy elements of it. So let's go ahead and hear this great piccolo solo on the third movement of the Bartók. Nice job, Debbie. Really great job on that.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Now, the fourth movement is titled Dueñas, which means hornpipe dance or mountain horn song. It begins with the melody in the solo violin, played beautifully by Dianne. And then when it repeats the melody, Bartók adds the flutes to the melody all along with all of the first violins. So, and it's a beautiful chorale-like piece in a way and really enjoyable to listen to. So let's go ahead and jump right into the fourth movement of the Bartók. Nice job, everyone. So when you heard the tempo pick up, it went right on into the rest of the movements, which all go one to the next without any break in between them. And those are all some very quick, fast dances that make a great ending to the entire piece. So before we go, if we just have a few minutes of time, there's one of the hot topics in the orchestra world right now is what is the world of the orchestra going to look like in the post-pandemic landscape? In other words, we've spent a year or more watching concerts streaming on Zoom or other platforms, and now we're able to go back to live concerts. And the question that some people have is, will the audiences return? Will people want to go back live in person? Would they prefer to watch it on streaming? What are the advantages and disadvantages of those different ways of consuming the concert, whether it be in person or on streaming? I wondered if I open it up to everybody, if anybody has any thoughts on that topic and where we're going from here. I'd love to hear it.
From the talk that I've heard from a couple of professional orchestras around here, a lot depends upon the venue and the rules, the regulations set up by the health organizations as far as how many people and what kind of people, rather than meaning vaccinated or not vaccinated, people can come to listen. And I think that really no one that I know of enjoys a streamed concert as much as an in-person concert. And hopefully that situation will be gradually returned to what we know and what we love, playing for real bodies, real people playing for real bodies. And I hope that happens very, very quickly.
Good point. Good point. Would anyone else like to chime in on that?
I can say that as a performer, I can hardly wait to get back in the concert hall. As a audience member, I just want to make sure it's safe, and I'm not sure what what safe is, but I'm just dying to. I mean, I've played a year of virtual performances with friends all over the world. I've learned a lot of new technology things that I never thought I would know. I'll probably continue some of those continuing on, but to be able to get in and play with my friends in the concert hall and have that intimate reaction from the audience is something that I'm really needing, just for me personally.
Very good. Anyone else?
I think it's really, nobody really knows what's going to happen right now. And so it's incumbent on everybody possible, and maybe some of you listening out there, to please get your shots. That is not a political message. That is a public health message. From my standpoint, it's really a good thing to do for yourself and for your fellow friends and society in general. So I would encourage you to encourage your own friends and family, if you can, to please do that. Get your shots.
I would like to just add one more little comment, and that's a tribute to the people with whom we just played this wonderful concert. A lot of the folks, as a majority of the orchestra, are not professional people, which doesn't mean anything fantastic. It just means you belong to a union and maybe you've had more experience. But some people are coming directly from their jobs. They practice the music at home. They enjoy and love to play music with other people. And it was a challenging program that I think with Michael's help, everyone really met, and was a really enjoyable concert, Michael. Really enjoyable. And my hat's off to those people that are just playing for the fun of it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think one of the things is we have a lot of esprit de corps in the orchestra because people are there because they want to be there.
Right.
And that kind of can make up for a little bit of maybe they're not as advanced of players, but they really care and they put their heart and soul into it, and they come really far. Like in the course of the rehearsals, I think the whole orchestra improves. So I was really pleased with that.
It was worth always rehearsing outdoors in the wind and our music flying everywhere and freezing cold.
That is true. We braved the elements when we began. We were rehearsing outdoors for a long time, and that was until it got down in the 50s at night, and then we had to
That's
look for
right.
another venue.
We came to Michael pleading, Michael, our fingers don't work under 60 degrees.
Absolutely, yep. We had to call that rehearsal early because no one could feel their fingers or figure out how to play. But you know, we made it work, and I think that's one of the things about this entire period in the pandemic has been everybody's figured out how to make it work, and we've come together to cooperate and help each other. And ultimately, we were still able to make music, even though it was in a different format sometimes. And I'm looking forward to. I'm hearing about schedules coming out from the LA Phil and other major performing orchestras in town, where they may ask audience members who are unvaccinated to wear a mask and maybe not. And they're still trying to kind of get a sense of what the protocol should be for everyone's safety. But I definitely, me personally, I like that connection, that emotional, almost spiritual connection that we get as players when we're in person, and that we get with our audience when we're in person, which I don't think translates over Zoom or online, no matter how good the technology is. So I really want to thank everyone for being here today. Each and every one of you has contributed a lot to our concert presentation today. And I appreciate all of your ideas. John, I appreciate your playing for us. And I just want to thank everybody for taking time out of your busy schedule to come in and join in and be a part of this concert broadcast today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Mike. Yes.
You're very welcome. And I want to thank again our sponsors, the Deirmendjian family and the Robinson family and John Lockhart and Ellis Patterson and everyone who supports the orchestra in a big or a small way that allows us to come together and do these concerts. So we really appreciate that. And I think with that, we're running out of time, so we will call it for today. I do want to mention for those of you out there that we will be performing our next concert in the weekend of October 9th and 10th. And so you can check the website, westlakevillagesymphony.com, for updates on exactly which day and where that will be. But we would love to see you there in person. And if not, we will be doing another broadcast of that concert as well after it's over. But we hope to see you there in person. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.